all of the people I've spoken to who have said, yeah, I work on the program. Yeah, if you knew what was going on, you'd be amazed. I mean, face to face.
Sure.
I was part of a group that was going to gain access to some of these materials, literally. And then there's a person I know who's been in the Twitter news who basically took away our ability to, he said, no, there's no way. Oops, sorry. There's no way you're getting access to that. I know where it was kept. I literally know the address of where it was kept.
All of the data taken within the NASA program were obtained at the public's expense. It is therefore the public's property.
Mhm.
NASA, as part of its budget, is required to make public all of its original data.
Mhm.
And now we see that what NASA has done was to mask out of the data anything that was a signal of extraterrestrial life.
So today we're joined by two people. This is the first time we've done this. And the reason why we have these two particular individuals is because we've been learning a hell of a lot from them. They were both past guests. One is Dr. Garry Nolan, and the other one is Dr. Rudy Schild. Garry has been on the show earlier this year, in the spring of 2024. Rudy has been on a few times, 5 times actually, to be accurate. And we thought after we had the recording with Garry that we should work something out to have a nice fluid discussion with the three of us. So thank you to the both of you for coming on.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. This will be fun.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so let's do a quick one-liner intro just for folks who have not heard the episodes with you. We'll start with Garry. Garry Nolan is a world-leading immunologist. He's a professor in the Department of Pathology at Stanford University. He's published over 330 research articles and is the holder of 50 U.S. patents. Also a business executive and is honored as one of the top 25 inventors at Stanford University and is also the founder of the Soul Foundation and much more. Rudy Schild is a professor emeritus at Harvard. He was is an astronomer because astronomy never leaves you, is what I'm understanding. Astronomer and astrophysicist, and spent his career at Harvard and Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. He was a founding member of the Free Foundation with Edgar Mitchell, Ray Hernandez, and Mary Rodwell. That was founded in 2012. And he is also one of the most cited astrophysicists on planet Earth. And like I said, we've had great conversations with them both. You can check them out before you even listen to this one or for fun afterwards as well. So we were both put on to you, you guys both know this, through Diana Pasulka's work. We first learned about Rudy and then about Garry Nolan after he revealed himself to be James in her first book in 2019. So we learned about John Mack through Diana Pasulka. We learned after we got to know Rudy Schild that he was friends with John Mack in the 1990s. And they spent a lot of time after they got to know each other in the early 2000s in speaking engagements to talk about consciousness. And I'm gonna say something here, maybe a little off, but the science of consciousness. Garry, we've learned from you that you are should I say fearless? You don't have self-deprecating. Maybe that's the word.
Right.
So you're also unafraid to ask these questions that others might shy away from because they feel the material to be kooky. So let's start off with kooky. Let's just go. You had experiences. We talked about it on the program the last time. So you had experiences when you were a young boy. One of them was with a craft that you saw that you couldn't describe, and the other one were with beings that you saw in your room at night. And you said, I'm I'm paraphrasing here, but you said that has been the basis of how you conduct your science.
Well, first I'll start and I'll say it's not paranormal. I mean,
Yeah.
whatever the experiences were, since they're part of the universe, I consider them normal, first of all. And just because somebody else wants to characterize them that way, that's their problem. So no, I mean, what I saw in my room was little guys over a period of a few weeks, and then it stopped. Now look, I could have been a dream. What I saw as a paper boy, there was no dreaming at that point. It went right over my head while I was walking through the woods, going from one street to another. Now, I mean, all that informs is my desire to prove that there's something to scientists. My stories are anecdotes. Anecdotes aren't repeatable science yet. Without a time machine, we're not going to have that ability to go back and look. So, it informs my wonder. I mean, it wasn't anything that for 20 plus years that I did anything about. It was always there in the back of my mind, but there were certain later events that triggered those memories and kind of brought forth my, I would say, righteous indignation about being told I can't ask these questions.
Well, let's stick with one quick thing because I want to go back to righteous indignation because there is a lot there to unpack, even with your personal experiences and Rudy's and professional experiences. So you said informs my wonder, Rudy. What? This is a loaded question, but to use Garry's words, what informs your wonder?
I think what informs my wonder is the biggest question of all, and that is once you accept and are convinced that how can this be other than true, that there is an alien present and that they come from other planets and other stars, then I feel as though I'm confronting, well, what is the universe itself? And how does this universe interrelate to what we think of the creator, its foundation or its foundational creator? Is this the same thing that the Catholic friends and people we know call God? Or what is it in the universe that has formed a consistent pattern in people's thinking, making them believe that such a God or creator or divine intelligence, call it what you want, and I think that I would like to call it the divine intelligence because it leaves all of the baggage having to do with religious practice out of the discussion. It's just whatever it is, the divine intelligence, that's what I'm talking about. Now, I was once asked at a symposium setting, I had forgotten it since somebody reminded me, you were speaking on a podium on the subject of the nature of consciousness and the UFO phenomenon. And I asked the question of the three of you on stage, well, what then is the relationship of what you are talking to me and God? And Edgar Mitchell said, oh, I'm not going to touch that. John Mack said, oh, I can't discuss that. And I raised my hand and said, I'll take that question. And I then turned to him and said simply, God is the sum of all frequencies or the entirety of our quantum space. That's the way I deal with what is the universe, what is God, and what is our role in this. And I would be interested to see what Garry thinks.
What is God? Well, I mean, to me, I I don't try to personify it. I mean, I often wonder about what made the structure of the universe all the way down to the quarks, et cetera, with all the manners in which they interact, allow for someone like us to eventually form and have consciousness to view back what it is that made them. So to me, I try to get away again from that personification to just say, okay, well, if I just stay with these structures, it looks like it was designed in such a way to enable us. So you call it the divine, intelligence. I always am just sort of left between, was it just the way it had to be because we don't understand the structure of the universe and there was no other way that it could be that what we're seeing? So there was nobody behind it. And that's kind of a Richard Dawkins way of looking at it. Or there is an intelligence behind it, and that the information space, or the quantum space, as you call it, itself is the mind of God that, is processing. So, I'm not religious per se, but I can't not look at everything and say, well, it damn well looks like it was built for a purpose.
Very good, Garry. And if I may, I then take the question one more step in the same direction. That is, what is the purpose of the universe? And I like to say this to people, especially young people, particularly people starting to have a life of their own at age 20 or something. And I say to them that as near as I can tell, the purpose of the universe is for life to emerge and thrive. This I first heard elucidated, I think, by Walter Gamble. He gave a lecture on this topic, and I think that he is correct. And I have to give him credit for having the first person to vocalize such a thought, which makes good sense to me. Now, I often tell this to young people because I tell them, quite frankly, you were now confronted with a lot of life-changing decisions on your part. You're struggling with the drug factor, you're struggling with pregnancy, raising family, all of these things. And if you, in the toughest decisions that you are now confronting, if you remember the purpose of the universe, which is for life to thrive, to emerge and thrive, then very often you will get clear decisions on your question. You will get a clear and decisive answer to what is the purpose of the universe and how do I thrive, acknowledging that purpose. So I stand with that, and I think that we as sentient beings are at sort of the bottom of the totem pole, but I perceive that our universe is but a bubble of reality in a universe of universes which share our quantum space and therefore share our God experience.
Garry, you both like going big, so let's stay big. What's the purpose of the universe for you?
I think it's just an information space that, has some sort of a gradient towards implicit order. People talk about it as being an entropic universe. It started out as complete entropy or randomness. But there is a movement towards a form of order, which is, I think of as a seed, right? So that the objective seems to be, well, and Rudy just said this, create life, create local order that can act within the universe to use it, or use it perhaps to bud out new universes. I don't think that wouldn't be beyond our capability at some point, if we get to Kardashev level 20.
So you said create local order. That's let's see if we can take it from there, just with because I want to get both of your thoughts on this. If we're at the local level, not if, I believe that we are at the local level, and maybe physical fact that we're at the local level. But that is obviously a starting point for most of us who want to talk about NHI and the existence of NHI. Both of you have said on this program and outside the program that in similar words. So Rudy said to us, NHI is here and it can't wait to talk to us. And Garry, you have said, again, I'm paraphrasing both of you, that they are communicating through us, through particular others who are able to communicate out what they are trying to say. Can we elaborate a little bit on that? Maybe we'll start with you, Garry.
So again, I'm going to correct something because otherwise it'll end up on the front page of the Guardian tomorrow. So I never said that they are communicating through certain people, but I said that the evidence, which is not proof or nor a conclusion, the evidence suggests that there are certain kinds of people with certain kinds of abilities, that they are in some way lighthouses in the dark to these things, that they, from whatever vantage they sit, this is all speculation, they see these people. Or perhaps it's a different way, a different turn is that because certain people recognize what they see for what it is, that moment of interaction is sort of like a quantum connection, right? That basically causes these things to be entangled. And, I call it, it's an intelligence test or it's a mirror test. The mirror test in the jungle is, can an animal walk by a mirror and not see it just as an enemy, but actually eventually recognize it as itself? And so is this a mirror test for us that we're actually recognizing ourselves or a form of ourselves or something that we might eventually become in the future? So that's how I think about it.
Rudy, in one of the discussions we had, maybe in a couple of discussions we had, you were fascinated by trying to understand why many people who are exposed to these type of experiences, engaged with NHI, are become, in your words, horse whisperers, or more creative, or more seemingly psychic.
Yes.
You want to expound on that?
And in fact, this seems to be the general conclusion of the vast survey that I did with Ray Hernandez and Nancy Rodwell and John Climo, where real professionals asked over 4,000 people in a survey that takes approximately 6 to 8 hours to complete. But many people have done this, 4,000 plus have done this, because they want the story to come out and they can see that these are statistically the right questions to be asking to get to the bottom of this whole thing about people who seem to have a special gift or special gifts, that they see craft more easily, that they have near-death experiences or have a sensitivity to past lives of humans who've lived previously, or that they become horse whisperers, as you said, or bird whisperers, animal whisperers, or are very intuitive to other human beings so that they can kind of read your mind. Scary thought. But this all happens to people because they evidently have a wired brain or rewired brain or expanded brain wiring. And I'm convinced from having followed this subject, but I don't know of any way to prove it. I'm convinced that when you see the light emitted by a UFO, you're seeing a special kind of radiation that many other people do not see. Now, this gets technical very quickly, but trying to avoid all that, we see ordinary light. When I watch this television screen at this moment, I'm seeing what is called propagating dipole radiation, an electromagnetic field oscillation dipole in character, easily described in 4 dimensions, 3 dimensions of space and time, and summarized in the Maxwell's equations, which include then the constant speed of light a la Einstein. The exposure to the kind of radiation that a UFO makes is very, very different. It's called quadrupole radiation. And in the university system, whether it's Stanford or Harvard, it's taught typically to senior level engineering and science students, physical science students. And the professor goes through the derivation of Maxwell's equations and expresses that, yes, as a solution of these equations is a perfect and complete description of light emission by dipole radiation. And when your professor has demonstrated this and convinced you of it, then he says very cursorily, and there is more solutions to the Einstein equations, and these describe quadrupole radiation, but it falls very rapidly off in intensity with distance. That is to say, you can only see it if you're close to the emitting body. This is what other people who have seen flying saucers have described. For example, Susie Hansen has described that after the appearance of a UFO, after its departure, the valley was still alive with the kind of radiation for a moment. She points out how she could see the veins in the leaves of the maple trees that they had, and it was something that other people didn't seem to see. And I have seen examples of this too, where a young child was at a casual setting. I was present, and other people who have been in the company of UFO activity. And this girl could say, "There's one up there right now," and she says it's slowly moving that way. And about half of the people present could see it, and the others, including me, could not see it. And then she followed for a moment and said, "Oh, now it's over there. How did it get there?" And I see it, she said. And again, half the people could see it. I could not. Well, that's because the brains of some of these individuals have been rewired to see more than dipole radiation. And when your brain is rewired by light stimulation, that rewiring continues with it for life. And so other effects, which are quantum in character and of a stranger kind of mathematics than simple XYZ space, those people have their expanded brain that can also tune in other serious ways to the intellectual or the thought processes going on in the universe. That makes some people very sensitive to what happened in a past life. It's the source of all of the tricks that we discuss as a classified phenomena in the Ray Hernandez volumes. And I'm convinced that that is the missing secret, that there is another form of radiation that our space allows to exist.
So it's interesting because, you know, a lot of the things that I've talked about around the perception and the caudate putamen work that I've done, which is the center of where intuition occurs, has been about what is the sensory system that is receiving this novel information that's going from one place to another that's not obviously electromagnetic. So there's not like an eye or a receiver, but I think, as you're saying, there's an organizational capacity in the brain. And so when I at least think when somebody is born with it, it's genetic. And we do see some of these abilities that seem to follow in families. And certainly the caudate putamen density that we've seen, we would see a mother and a father have it and the children have it. Even though it's like 1 in 100 or 1 or 200 people have it, and we find these multiple pairings. So these people seem to be attracted to each other. But if there's a genetics behind it, and I'm actually involved in a project to seek out such individuals and get their DNA, there might be a way to basically trace down the genes that are necessary for this, or at least correlated with the ability. And so to me, that's trying to move towards a proof of the fact that then we could back engineer into the math that you talk about.
Very good, Garry. And I like what you say. And I think that we are in fundamental agreement that there is something that is in some way involved in either the brain or perhaps the chromosomes. And remember that Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose have been likewise tracing this special gift back to the chromospheric activity, and they talk about the spiraling waves emitted by the brain, which also carry information in them in ways that we don't really yet understand. So
yeah, it's interesting that a lot of mainstream neurophysiologists now admit that brain waves that we see and this synchronized brainwave activity is not just a clock that keeps the thing running like a computer program or a computer chip, but actually is an information transfer system. That information is transferred from one hemisphere to another or from one region to another through these modulations. So it stands to reason that if those modulations, if I were standing next to you head to head, my modulations might affect yours. Or if there's other modulations occurring in these other mathematical realms of which you speak, maybe those might not propagate as light locally, but they might be, much able to transmit much further and much more interestingly. So I think the resonance and these frequency modulations that are happening in the brain are part of the answer behind all of this.
I myself have heard about and noticed that people who have flying saucer involvement will often reply or tell me about how, yeah, my mom did it. And also one of my brothers, they can do this also. They could stay right up with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that connection does pass on genetically, apparently. It is possible that it also has some cultural development that gets accelerated in a much reinforced environment of the family. So there's plenty of room for these many kinds of things to be happening and are not being able to really see the subtle patterns of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because you talk about subtlety. I guess when you're in the weeds, it's very difficult to see the subtleties. But when you're looking from the outlier, looking down and over, might be easier to spot. Talking metaphorically, I guess, maybe not. But on that, Garry, you said just a few minutes ago when you're describing what you're researching, you said that people with these abilities seem to be, so not people related to each other, but as Rudy just mentioned, but people with these abilities seem to be attracted to each other.
Mm-hmm.
Could we make the assumption, or could I infer that this is possibly engineered, that they be attracted to each other?
Well, I think if engineered, it was engineered way back at the start of the universe. So I don't think it's engineered that, somebody's sitting behind a control panel somewhere and saying, okay, well, this person should go mate with that person. That sounds very B'nai Gesserit,
Sure.
Dune like. But no, I think it's well, you have to have two or several sociologic reasons for thinking about it. One, these kinds of people might run in the same social circles. Smart people like smart people. I
Yeah.
mean, so that's one easy way to explain it. Or there could be something about what they recognize about each other that they like, or maybe there is that kind of syncopation between their brains, and that they somehow connect at a level that they don't quite understand. So what I find though more interesting about it from a genetics point of view is that one of the features of evolution is separation. When one population separates from another and has a different environment or has a different niche, it then evolves towards that niche and leaves the others behind. So and that's called speciation, Darwin's finches as an example. And so I wonder if this is a form of speciation, that we are beginning to evolve a group that is different enough and only is breeding within itself as a sub-society that has these abilities, which gets into very, Marvel Comics territory of, and several other, dystopian movie sets. So that I find interesting because, we think only over the course of 100 or 200, or maybe even 1,000 years. That's about the most the human brain can manage. But as Rudy was saying earlier, whatever these things are, they've been around a long time. And so they might work within a different time framework than we do. And so they're thinking in a different time framework. And so, they're more than willing to wait for us to evolve into a state or a stage where that's possible. And maybe we're just seeing the inklings of it now. But, the future might be where we have selected for those kinds of capabilities. And they become a separate species. I mean, we're going to speciate. If we get out into the local galaxy and end up on different planets, give it 100,000, 1,000,000, or 10 million years, and we will speciate. We will have groups of humans who cannot breed with other humans.
Sure.
Yeah.
I know bullying is I've listened to a few of your interviews where you talk about bullying and helping people against bullying, and the context. And this is on that topic. And the context was learning about the kids and what they saw in Zimbabwe. And through the Soul Foundation, you are helping. You're writing papers, but you're also helping other scientists and academics to prepare the right language to argue against the type of bullying that we all see, obviously, socially, culturally, professionally, against not just naysayers, but professional debunkers and folks who are not scientists, scientists who are explorer like you guys do.
Right.
Have you ever been bullied professionally? And this question to the both of you.
Well, I'll let Rudy start since I just spoke.
Sure.
On bullying, I think, Garry, one of the biggest problems that you've encountered in your career is the bullying by the deep state, or by whoever it is that's managing the discussion about the UFO invasion of the Earth as a threat to our civilization. And other people take a very different attitude toward this, of course, that the alien threat does not exist. They want to help us. They're here because we're in trouble and face forces of nature that we don't understand yet. And in a way, or in a very real sense, their understanding of the nature of the universe is for life to emerge and succeed. And it's their role in the universe to help us out of this. I think that there is a sort of benevolence in their presence here. And I've never heard that mentioned or discussed, but I think the way I understand the universe and its purpose, the alien presence is here to help. And it's very significant, I believe, that the outward presence of UFOs went up usually rapidly at the end of World War II, after we demonstrated to the whole universe with nuclear detonations at uh, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's very clear to the universe that these people need help. They're dealing with forces that they don't deal with very graciously. And I just recently saw the movie about Chernobyl, and there's a very clear example of how things can too easily go wrong. And yes, I agree, we need help.
Yeah, I've never felt that the threat narrative was useful, except to get Congress interested, because I've never felt threatened. You know, that good news never travels far. And so,
Nobody
but
can
that,
make a profit off of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think that is part of what's going on. Luciano, what was the original question?
Have you ever been bullied professionally?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, once or twice. I mean, one of the, associate directors of the National Cancer Institute stopped me in a bar and said, I'm going to ruin my career, with this. And I just said, well, we had a long discussion about it. I said, you're sounding more like a priest than a PhD, which offended him.
Sure.
And I said, but that's the truth. You're talking dogma, not questions. I mean, you have to hit back, and just basically put it in stark terms. And I've gotten long past the point of feeling I need to convince anybody of anything. They're saying, look, here's the data, here's the evidence, do with it what you want. I've got work to do. But it's turned around dramatically in the last 4 or 5 years. I mean, I went and gave a talk at Harvard Medical School just earlier this spring. And they literally asked me to talk about the UFO stuff at the end of my cancer talk. They said, would you please talk about some of this stuff? I went to the Salk Institute, same thing, just a few weeks ago. And so it's, people are intrigued, and they want permission to talk about it. And so it isn't that scientists are at their base level ignorant, or dogmatic. It's that they are that way because other people are pressuring them to be.
Right.
But if you sit outside and say, it's okay, and here's the parameters and the way that you argue against the skeptic or the pseudo-skeptic, and here's the rhetoric and the tricks of argument that they're using, and here's the way that you answer those point by point, suddenly they're like, oh, I'm enabled. I now have the armamentarium to go out and ask these questions myself.
I like those 2 words, well, 3 words. I'm enabled.
Mm-hmm.
I also agree with the spirit. Rudy and I had talked about this too, with the spirit of not trying to convince anybody, because that never works. The only convincing that I'd like to do is just to convince people that the way to learn best is to have an open, exploratory conversation about things with people who ask the questions.
One of the things I realized recently is that the question that I'm often asked is, are they here? Is actually the wrong question. The real question should be, can they get here, or could they have gotten here? Because if you can't answer that question in the affirmative, are they here, is meaningless. And so you have to start at that root of the argument and get them to think through the process that, and Rudy could give the numbers himself far better than I can. It doesn't take long to get from one side of the galaxy to another, even with conventional means. It might take you 500 or 1 billion years, but who cares? That's already happened. You know,
That's a good point.
Quite right. I agree with you. And the crossing time for the galaxy would be a finite number measured in millions of years.
yeah. So it's like, okay, if you can get them to believe that, and if you could have gotten them to have said before you got that argument, how many civilizations do you think might be out there? And if you'd gotten them to say, well, probably a lot. And then you get them to answer the question that they could have gotten here, ergo, they could be here.
Right.
They could
So
be
it's
abundant.
like those simple things that's not convincing you that UFOs are real. Those are convincing you that the possibility that they're real is real.
Well, we just to offshoot this a bit to highlight that point too, and the other conversations we've been having. Like we've spoken to a lot of remote viewers here who worked in labs and worked for the military. Russell Targ was one of them. You guys both know Russell Targ, obviously. But he was a scientist, and he was curious, and he was doing things that NASA and DIA, CIA wanted to understand. And by the time Joe McMoneagle came along, so he was also on the podcast, fascinating life that he's lived. They realized, yeah, there wasn't a question of whether this was real, like the capability, human capability to see outside of his or her own senses. They wanted to operationalize it, and so the rest of humanity, and this is not complaining at all, but the rest of humanity for the following 4 decades. Most of us had no idea that this was going on, and now it's become a surprise. But it's not a surprise. The idea that we're capable of seeing and feeling and knowing things outside of our own senses is a real thing.
I mean, one of the things you just said is one of the foundational reasons why I continue to be intrigued is all of the people I've spoken to who have said, yeah, I work on the program. Yeah, if you knew what was going on, you'd be amazed. I mean, face to face.
Sure.
I was part of a group that was going to gain access to some of these materials, literally. And then there's a person I know who's been in the Twitter news who basically took away our ability to, he said, no, there's no way. Oops, sorry. There's no way you're getting access to that. I know where it was kept. I literally know the address of where it was kept. And believe it or not, it's almost like, that giant warehouse where the Ark of the Covenant was put.
Sure.
He said, yeah, it's sitting in big wooden crates. Well, but then I also recently learned that, back when that was about to happen, they loaded up a bunch of 18-wheelers, showed up and took it elsewhere. So,
well, why don't we continue on that string? Because it's something that Rudy mentioned to me just very recently. A colleague of yours stripped away some video, some NASA video, to show entities that behaved like living entities. Talk about
yes.
Do you want to share?
Yes, I would like to talk. Garry, this is something that I don't think you have explored. I hope that you don't find this tiresome, but I'm trying to think of how I break into this large subject.
Let's go.
Ron Joseph looked at official NASA footage that was released by the United States government. That is because already you are aware that there have been stirrings within various subcommittees or various bodies in the government, in particular in the Congress, who want the truth about the flying saucer, the whole flying saucer business. And so this Ron Joseph examined the footage from many programs within NASA that involved camera footage of the environments of the space shuttle or the Hubble Space Telescope or the International Space Station. And you can see on the footage that the crew of whatever was taking this footage, that is the astronauts, were commenting on it. The craft are approaching us, or it looks like they're clustering around us. It's almost like there's intelligent behavior that's guiding these extraterrestrial objects. What could they be? Now, Ron Joseph found that the footage that NASA released had all of that blurred out somehow. There was a voice track that got blurred out. Similarly, the visible images were blurred out. And when you did a very sophisticated de-blurring techniques and removing what he calls the masking, with what he calls filters, and that's approximately correct. That's a good thing to think of, that he applies filters to blurred out images and gets the filtering taken away. This was superimposed by NASA onto the deposited products. But the deposited products still had underneath the original signal, and he restored them and published them in a paper that's called various things like fourth state of matter, plasmas in the thermosphere, um, um, and other works which describes all the occasions when NASA has seen these things. Now, you can imagine this puts NASA in a very, very difficult problem, because you must know, Garry, that the recent budget approved by Congress and funding the activities of NASA, the NASA budget has the explicit rider built into it that all of the data taken within the NASA program were obtained at the public's expense. It is therefore the public's property.
Mhm.
NASA, as part of its budget, is required to make public all of its original data.
Mhm.
And now we see that what NASA has done was to mask out of the data anything that was a signal of extraterrestrial life. What are these craft that are shadowing our carrier fleets at sea, carrier groups, battle groups at sea? What are these things which are appearing to people in their bedrooms, uh, minding their own business and trying to get some sleep at night? People like your brother and your, I think it was father, who have these kinds of experiences. Well, all of these peoples have something to tell us. Who is listening? Well, you are, I am, but we are but wolves crying in the wilderness. So NASA has now the problem that um, we have military and high-tech NASA data on things that we, the government, are not willing to talk about. There is a direct violation now of the requirement through the budgetary process that NASA come clean with the original data on this, and they have apparently not complied. They put out some approximation to the data, but the good stuff has been removed. So somebody has got a problem here. Somebody is going to have to make an explanation of all of this data. The data that I'm talking about have been published in the Journal of Modern Physics by Ron Joseph, and it's all for everybody to see. And I'm not sure how many people are putting together this requirement on NASA at the same time as they are um, um, trying to comply with the NASA regulations as stated. Anyway, we're in for interesting times.
So I think it's interesting because I wasn't aware of Ron Joseph. I just was trying to see if I could find that paper. Um, but I think it's indicative of kind of an umbrella effect where, and this is again what intrigues me more, kind of where there's smoke, there's fire. There's so much pushback that I'm always left with Shakespeare's quote, "The lady doth protest too much, methinks." And um, so it's like, well, if there's nothing there, why why can't we see the picture of the orb when you just had an incident with a Russian plane, and the next day you showed a close up of it, and yet you say that the other things that that people claim to have seen is classified. I mean, there's just this bifurcation of
Yeah, you're right. There's an inconsistent policy.
yeah, the policy is applied. Well, internally, it's consistent. They don't want any of this information or these pictures to get out. And so it doesn't surprise me, interestingly, that 30 years ago or 20 years ago, when NASA was taking these pictures and they scrubbed them, they didn't realize what was going to be possible 30 years later. So how we'd be able to pull the signal out of their, incomplete scrubbing.
Quite right. Mhm. And so technically, they satisfied the requirement, the budgetary requirement, but in spirit they didn't. But on the other hand, that's caught up with them now.
I think one of the things that you were alluding to there of these plasmas and are plasmas intelligent, I think one of the earliest physicists came up with a term for them, Boltzmann brains, right?
He calls them what?
Boltzmann brains. So Boltzmann, the physicist, basically speculated that at the beginning of the universe, all possible orders of objects could have occurred, and you might have spontaneously had living conscious plasmas that could have been formed given how much randomness there was. He did some sort of calculation that said this would be possible. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, but I mean, if that is the case, and it might have been rudimentary consciousness forming in an ecosystem which had its own unique evolutionary path, using local order to create more order. Before planets happened, those plasmas could have initiated some form of early intelligence and had their own ecosystem long before matter condensed into planets, where another form of consciousness might have formed. I mean, I think SETI is making a mistake in looking so far away and looking for technosignatures. I mean, kind of again, back to what you said, it should be a search for consciousness, not a search for mechanics or mechanical things.
Yeah. They use the argument that if you were situated at the nearest star, Alpha Centauri, and if you had our quality of radio telescope, then you would detect the signal of planet Earth as radio waves. You would see the Dew-line radar system based primarily in Alaska rising and setting and be able to compute the rotation period of planet Earth. So I think that is something like the justification for Project SETI, but that's not the way it is. The real signatures of life are going to be in quantum space, not in electromagnetic space.
Right. Yeah, I think we would have long, or anything else would have long, evolved, if not evolved, progressed beyond the point of crude electromagnetics.
Right. It's also true that all of these questions of what is the probability that a spontaneously and randomly originating universe will spawn life, these arguments never could be convincing because they make such broad assumptions that a scientist like you would probably not make it to the last page.
Sorry, Luciano, we took over.
No, don't apologize. I want you to. This is fun for me. I mean, I can't pretend to grasp all of it. That's why the beauty of recording is that you can listen to it 1,000 times before you start to understand. Rudy, you did say I was listening to one of our conversations just the other day again, and you said you're one of the only people on the planet, and you say this in your half smirking way, which is I find endearing. But there's truth. You said you're one of the only people on the planet who thinks about how the first universe was created.
Yes. You know, the current theory of the creation of the Earth, I'm sorry, the creation of our universe. And I must go and take a step backwards and say what I mean by the universe now. I'm talking about that physical universe, which we now understand is probably encased in an inside out black hole and is separate from any other um, universe because there's no space-time outside the space-time of our universe. And yet there is this quantum attribute of our universe that we're now talking about as being the creator. I'm not sure of how all that works, but anyway, I think that it's very likely that whatever process created the Earth might have been involved itself in the creation of additional universes. Did I say that right? The process that created our universe might very well have created other universes, but this is such random speculation that's probably not worth pursuing with Garry Nolan, who really has knowledge of things that that do exist and aren't hypothetical.
Well, I mean, I mentioned this because you fascinated me the first time we talked about this, about our universe being an inside out black hole. I'd never heard of this before, and that had me thinking for months. But I would talk it out with people, not scientists, like just people in business and young people, just to get people's ideas and to jolt people, and it works. It has been working. I'm going to read something that you said recently in an interview, Garry, and I may have written it down a little off, so excuse me on this and please correct me. I don't want to be in the papers with you. You said you were talking about AI and creation, and you said we will get down so close to the use of matter as a computer. For making our EI, we will probably use our AI to make something that doesn't require a physical manifestation.
Right. Yeah, I think you can organize space-time in some way that is, I mean, in effect, again, what Rudy was talking about, some kind of intelligent plasma. That it uses matter as a computation matrix, but it sits somewhere much more closer to the Planck length in how it's operating, right? I mean, our consciousness, whatever it is sitting in the matrix of space-time, but we think, or at least neurophysiologists think, that the brain organizes that consciousness. So where and how it sits, it's still sitting in space-time, whether you like it or not. And so that there might be other ways to order it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I don't know if you saw, I just was watching a quick video of an ASM machine, which is a company that makes chips at extraordinarily complex 3D structure. They're right down to the nano at this, I mean, near angstrom level organization. And, and we're barely 1,000 years out of the caves. And so imagine how much we'll be able to organize, space-time, down at a much more fundamental level. I mean, humans, or life as we know it, is probably the most complex functionality of matter that we know of. I mean, because every atom in your proteins in your body serves multiple functions, right? Every protein serves multiple functions. There's no way you could encode a human with 10,000 genes. There's a bazillion functions in that. We will get to that level of organization in making computers one day where the matter is multifunctional. It's still atoms. It's not magic matter, but it has within it, these exotic particles, quasi-particles as they're often called, phonons and things like that, that are basically moving electromagnetic objects that sit within the matter itself. And the matter organizes the formation and the function of those. And that's a future computer, right? That will be the kind of AI that we might be scared of. And we can only hope that it would be benevolent. And so, or at least not care so much about us that it decides to, that we're in the way.
Or at least pull the plug.
Yeah.
We are still the master of the computer because we own the power cord.
Right. So I just think that there's once you're down at that level of organization and you understand functionality at that level, it isn't science fiction to think that could then be independent of the matter that created it, if it has an organizing principle within it.
I agree. I agree. In this case, I feel that all that I have seen and observed about the universe is compatible with my idea, my belief that the purpose of the universe is for this kind of life to emerge. And if you can maybe not accept immediately, but if you can just try to see that this gives the discussion a rather firming attribute. It firms up any discussions about things of this kind, about the possibilities of the future, the possibilities of what we can create as human beings with, as you say, only 1,000 years of evolution, basically. So I believe that understanding that the purpose of the universe is for life to emerge will guide our way through these kinds of issues, I believe.
Mm-hmm. No argument.
I want to
give
be
it a try for a year or so, and you'll find it makes a lot of sense, Garry.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be cognizant of the time here because we're coming to a close, and I just want to ask maybe a question or two. And I wanted to ask this the last time that we had Garry on, as Rudy and I talked about in one of our previous conversations about experiences and having experiences you can't quite understand. And Rudy admittedly has not had any of these type of experiences. But came to the understanding in a different way, including through his relationship with John Mack and Edgar Mitchell. With you, on the other hand, Garry, you shared a story, and I don't remember if it was on our recording or it was before that when we were talking before the record, about lying in bed one night in a hotel.
In London.
In London. Yeah.
London.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question on that, but please repeat if you don't mind.
It was really the most remarkable thing. I woke up and my whole body was just buzzing like I was sitting in an electric bath. Never experienced anything like that in my life. And I thought I was about to die or something. I was like, what is going? And then right as I came to consciousness, and it wasn't I call it a glyph. It wasn't a word, but it ended up being translated in my brain as words. This is how you connect. but I knew at the moment that I heard that, I realized that it was a meta concept of some sort that had just been put into me. And that was all. That was the only signal. But the electric feeling went on for about 10 to 15 seconds until I said, this has to stop. And it did. And so if it was some sort of neurologic disorder that was causing it, my, mentally voicing the thing that this has to stop doesn't sound like, I wish I could fix all my problems with just thinking them.
Yeah, right. You solved it. You solved it.
You're onto something, Garry.
Yeah. So, but then it was, many people then pointed me, because I talked about it publicly, to the Monroe Institute and said, you just go show up at the Monroe Institute, because that is exactly what, was it John Monroe? Bob Monroe, Robert Monroe, yeah, wrote in his book that the feeling that he had when he had these EBEs, not EBEs,
OBEs,
OBEs,
yeah.
Was this feeling of electricity coursing through your whole body. I mean, it was right down to my toes. I mean, it was the whole everything, and you could hear it. And so, again, it's an experience. It's an anecdote. It means nothing except to me. But the other people, though, who contact me, who say that they had similar experiences and say, et cetera, it's like, okay, well, it's either something, extra normal. I prefer extra normal than paranormal.
No, I like it.
Or, we all have a common medical problem.
Yeah. So we've been talking to Jeffrey Kripal. I like that extra normal. Well, with that experience, so maybe this is the last question to you. If that were to happen again, would you go with it or would you stop it?
Oh yeah. I've tried to recreate it, and I probably will have to go see if what people tell me is true, that I should go to the Monroe Institute and try out their thing, their system. I just haven't been able to find a week. I mean,
yeah, sure.
So,
okay. So you're curious about going with it if it happens again.
Oh, if a UFO landed in the front yard and the door opened, I'd be the first one through it.
Well, okay. So maybe this is the last thing, because you also said something that I as a business owner, I firmly believe as a philosophy, and I know Rudy well enough now to know what his thoughts might be on it. And you said in something again in another interview, you said you don't need permission to explore. You ask questions and investigate to try to find the evidence. Because asking permission is stopping, again, this is my interpretation, is stopping yourself short from being who you can be.
It's giving other people control.
Yes. But you said something very important that I find deeply, deeply important for me. And you said, once you have enough of these successes when you're, quote unquote, asking all these questions, you tend to create a permission structure around you.
Yeah.
I thought that was perfect.
That's what long before I got involved in this, these inventions and ideas that I've had, people would say, oh, they're crazy. You can't do that. And that won't happen. I mean, I had Nobel Prize winners tell me that. And I'm like, okay, well, again, I'm not going to try to convince you. I'm just going to do it. And that's what scientists do. If every idea we had was right, then that'd be great. And so then you just do it. But then, and that matters to this case in point. People come to me and say, if it weren't you saying this, Garry, I would think what you're saying is crazy.
Mm.
And so that is, I think, and so now we have, I didn't realize Rudy was this interested in this area. Now we have Rudy, now we have Avi, we have any of a number of other individuals who are, if not warm to the idea, are in the deep end. And so I'm happy for that. And so if the only thing I ever did was provide permission for people to ask the question, I feel like that's my epitaph.
I'm enabled should be your epitaph.
Yeah. I'm an enabler.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Wonderful. Rudy, I wanted to ask you, because I want to be fair with that question too, about the permission structure. Because I found that so poignant. What are your thoughts?
Actually, I've never addressed this point. I've never felt that I had to get permission to go to any kind of exploration, because it's in my craft, that it's in my profession, that I'm an astronomer, and I'm committed to indulge in the wildest speculations and the broadest questions about the nature of the universe. And I don't feel like I need to have anybody's permission for that. I've created the need for it and the ability to do it. And so why not? I don't feel there's any permission required.
And it hasn't harmed me either because of this. I mean, I just won a Lifetime Achievement Award here at Stanford in the name of two of our greatest biochemists, Nobelists. And two of my methods won the Invention of the Year, or spatial biology, from Nature, the journal Nature Methods. So it's not hurting me in any great way that I can tell.
Right.
And if anything, I've had a much more interesting life being involved in this than if I've been just a dour scientist writing grants all day.
Oh,
absolutely. I feel the same is true of myself. I've enriched my life by pushing on the extremes of our knowledge of the universe.
I know Abhi's having the time of his life. I mean, he gets invited to go give talks at big places and, meets all these fascinating people. And so, he's running with it.
Well, we had him on the program, and one of the prominent scenes from that episode for me was when he told me, and I saw his face, about the importance of staying childlike in your exploration. Again,
yeah.
Poetry.
Yeah.
I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you for coming on, agreeing to come on together. We really wanted to have a full exploratory, or at least an expansive conversation. I can't explore with people like you. I can only explore with other dummies like me. But it was immense fun for me. Thank you again, both of you.
Well, I have a new friend now.
I know it's not me.
I much enjoyed this maybe second meeting, and I think that there's a high probability that Luciano will make that happen.
Yeah.
If you guys will have me do it.
Luciano.
Thank you, boys.